We are in Daf. Bezos Hashem. Today's Daf is Daf Mem Aleph Amud Amud Aleph. We're going to start straight from the Mishnah. So let's make it a little bigger. Before we begin the Mishnah, very straightforward Daf. It's going to take us very quickly to do because a lot of this stuff is familiar. I just want to point out to you, I'm going to just put on the screen over here, just to remind you what the Chumash says in Parshas Mishpatim regarding damages. If you have an ox, right? Let's just read a few psukim. That's what you need to know. If you have an ox, it belongs to a man or a woman. A man owns an ox or a woman owns an ox, and it gored a man or a woman. So it killed a person, v'meis. So the pasuk says, "Sokel yisokel ashar," you kill the ox, and it's aser bahanav, v'loyachol v'spesari, u'balashar naki, and we don't have any monetary payments on the man. It's not his fault. His ox went crazy and killed somebody. But the pasuk says, which means if he knew from the day before and previous times, it gored people or it gored, it's a goring type of animal, and he was warned. Muad means he was warned. That's why it's called muad. Two people, witnesses came and said, your animal, you got to watch him. He didn't watch the animal. And then the animal killed a person. So Hashar Yisokel, the ox gets killed. The Gam Ba'al of Yumas, very interesting. The Torah says, really, you got to put the owner of the ox to death. V'im koifa, well, we don't put the owner of the ox to death. The Torah says, in koifer yushas olav, if they put a kapara, basically, a way of penance placed upon him, like he pays a monetary payment to get out of the Misa B'dei Shemayim, basically. The Nasam Pidya Nafshay, he has to give the redemption of his soul. Pashtus, he gives the value of himself, not the person he damaged. Even if his ox damaged a homeless person who might have a very low value, if the owner is a rich guy, he has to give the value of himself as a civil damages that he has to pay to the family of the person that got killed. Everything that Bezdin decides. Okay, then the Chumash says one more thing. What happens if the ox gored a eved, a slave, or a maid? So then it doesn't matter how much the maid or the slave is worth. It could be somebody who has such a unique skill that nobody in the world has this skill, and so this slave might be worth, $1 million. All you have to do is pay 30 shekels to the master. And once again, you kill the ox because it killed a human being, but it's one price. So that's the subject of our Mishnah. So let's see our Mishnah, beginning Mem Aleph Amar Aleph. We're going to go very quickly. Somebody says, he walks into Bezdin and says, Pitisias Bita Shal Pliny, I seduced the daughter of so-and-so. Basically, he's saying he's agreeing of guilt. So we have a rule that a person who admits guilt does not pay the fine. You see, there are two types of payment in the Torah, as you can see. If it's a set payment, no matter what, the Torah gives you the price, that's called a knas. And therefore, it's a fine that the Torah placed on the person. And for example, if you seduce a girl, so then you pay 50 shekel for that act. So it doesn't matter what the girl is or whatever it is. So if he admitted to it, we have a klal that if you admit to the fine, you're potter. The only time you get hit with the fine, if Bezdin, if you were brought to court and Adam said you did such and such, and the Bezdin said you're chayiv to pay the fine. But so he said, Petisius Bita Shal Pliny. So he is, the Mishnah gives you the halacha. Mishalein boishes upagam al piatzmai. There are other payments when you seduce a girl. You pay the embarrassment part. There's monetary damages. Depends on the girl. Depends on the person doing the damage. Upagam, and you pay the loss and value of this girl. She lost her basulim. She lost her virginity. So she's worth less on the maid market, which we discussed yesterday. There's a certain value to that. So he has to still pay that al piatzmai based on his admission. The ein mishal knas, but he doesn't have to pay the knas. Why doesn't he pay the knas? Because the knas is a set price, and we have a rule: moide beknas potter. If you admit to something that obligates you to pay a fine, so then you don't have to pay it. Somebody says, for example, ganafti. Let's go back into the Chumash. Just one more thing. The pasuk says, "Ki yignav ish sharaseh." If a person steals an ox or a sheep, he slaughtered it or sold it. So when he stole it, he already has the obligation to pay kefil. 2. Now the Torah says, if he slaughtered it, then he has to pay chamisha baka yisham tachas ashar. For an ox, he pays 5 times as much. Number 5. And if it's a sheep he stole, instead of a sheep, if it was a sheep that he stole and slaughtered it, he pays 4 sheep. So that extra payment is knas. As you can see, the principle is always the first principle. The 100% is really a mammon. So therefore, that's called mammonis, and the extra stuff is called knas. So let's read it inside. A man says, I stole your ox. Mishalim and as a keren al piatzmi. He has to obligate it to pay back what he stole. And he doesn't have to pay the double, and he doesn't have to pay the 4 and the 5 in case he slaughtered it, because by admitting that you did such a thing, you already reduced the obligation for you to pay kefil, because you admit that you stole. And once you take away the kefil, then you don't pay anything, because kefil is part of the 4 and the 5. So therefore, once you're not going to pay the kefil because it's knas, you're not going to pay the 4 and the 5 because it becomes 3 and 4. And the Torah says only if you pay kefil, then you pay 4 and 5 in case you stole it, in case you slaughtered it. Next piece of the mission, another example. A guy says, my ox killed so-and-so, or killed the ox of so-and-so. So the Mishnah says, he has to pay the civil damages. What are the civil damages that if you killed a human being? That's called koifer. That means we learned in the Chumash that if your ox kills somebody, you have to pay your value to redeem your soul from being misib de shemayim, because your ox killed a human being, and you give that money to the victim's family. That's when your ox killed so and so. Or if your ox was, let's say, a muad, it gored 3 times, so then you're paying 100%. So then and you admitted it. Then you have to pay whatever you admitted to. That if your ox gored so and so, or the ox of so and so, you pay the damages. Let's say you say my ox killed the slave of so and so. Well, if your ox kills a slave, there's only one price to pay, no matter what the value of the slave is. That is 30 shekel. Because you admitted it, you don't have to pay. You walk away scot-free. Why? Because the 30 shekel is a knas. And since it's a knas, you were admitted to a knas, you're not obligated to pay. Zahaklal, this is the rule. What defines something as a knas? If in chance that you can pay more than what you did damage, let's say you damaged your shar killed a slave that's worth 10 shekel. So the Torah tells you have to pay 30 shekel. So that means it's a knas. The Torah gives you one price of a knas. So then, the Mishnah gives you the rule. In that case, if you admit prior to being brought to court, then you don't have to pay. So that is what the basic rule of the entire Mishnah. You have to determine if you're coming to court and admit guilt. It depends. If you're admitting if it's a knas that you're admitting to, then you're potter from paying. But if it's a momentous issue that you're admitting to, then you have to pay. So now the Gemara asks just a question. The example that we used, the first example that we used in the Mishnah, was that a guy comes to Bez and says, I seduced so-and-so's daughter. So the Gemara's case, the question is, Velisni or Nasni? Why don't we also give the case of the guy said, I was ma'anis, raped somebody else's daughter? Because we know that you also pay a knas when a person rapes somebody else's daughter. So since all the Mishnayos up until this point was using Einis or Mafata in the same sentence, so why did we drop in our Mishnah Anasti, Einis over here? Why don't we discuss it? So the Gemara says, Loi mi boye kamar. Our Mishnah doesn't have to tell you that case, because Loi mi boya, there's no novelty in the case when he says Anasti, I was ma'anis, your daughter. The Loi ka pagam lo. because he's not making her look bad. She's a victim of rape. Therefore, certainly he's potter from the knas, but the mishalim boishis ubagam al piatzma. He will pay the boishis ubagam based on his admission, because that is a mominus. That's not a knas. But I would have thought, Abel, PTC, when you say, I was seduced somebody else's, so that means you had a willing accomplice. The girl was wanted to do this act. So by admitting, if you're going to make the guy pay boishis upagam, by derivation, you're embarrassing this girl, because you're saying that this girl desired to have relations out of wedlock. And if once it gets out there in the papers, it's an embarrassment. So I would have thought that he should not pay boishis upagam, just not to give validity to the story. The Kalpagad law, you're shaming her. I would have thought he should not pay if he admits it, because he's going to cause her embarrassment. And so therefore, Kamash Malam, that he should pay it. And maybe it's the Kamash Malam teaching you that despite she knows she's going to get embarrassed from this, but her father, at least, or maybe herself, but her father will receive boishis upagam. So his father is going to get a monetary payment, so she could forego just the moment, the embarrassment of that this story is going to get out there. And Masnisin, our Mishnah doesn't agree with the following Tana. The Tanya Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon held, Af boishis upagam eina mishalim al piatzmoi. He doesn't pay if boishis upagam by a mefuta. He doesn't pay boishis upagam. Why? Because if we allow him to pay the boishis upagam, then everybody's going to give credence to the story, of course, because we're making the guy pay. And loy kol keheberi shifka bita shapani. He has no right to shame the daughter of so and so. So Amalei Rapapa la Baya. So Rapapa asked the Baya, according to Rab Shimon, you don't pay boishis upagam. What happens? Nichalali dida. Let's say she doesn't mind if the story gets into the paper. She doesn't mind. Would Rab Shimon agree that you should pay? Dilma, so the Gemara answers, Dilma loy nichalei la avia. But maybe her father wouldn't agree to that. So even if she doesn't mind getting embarrassed, maybe her father doesn't mind getting embarrassed. So the Gemara asks the question, Nichalei la avia mai. But let's say both her and her father don't mind if the story gets out. Would Rab Shimon say that they should pay boishis upagam? Answers the Gemara, maybe the extended family would not want this story to get out. So just because the father and the daughter don't mind, but there's an extended cousins or whatever, if you have this story getting out and the family, it could lead to embarrassment to the extended family. So the Gemara asks one final question. Let's say they took a vote and all the family didn't mind if the story leaked out. Would Rab Shimon still say that you pay boishis upagam? So the Gemara says that's impossible. It's impossible that she doesn't have a cousin, a distant relative, that would not want this story to get out. And therefore, since it's impossible to that situation, she has no right to moichel something, to forgive something, if that would lead to embarrassment for the family. So therefore, he doesn't pay boishis upagam because we don't want, to give credence to the story. And that's why Rab Shimon has this unique shita, not like our Mishnah, that even if he's moide by himself, not only is he not going to pay paganas, he's not going to pay boishis upagam. The Mishnah continues. So we learned in the Mishnah that you pay the keren. The Gemara, this is Baba Kama, and that's how this Masechta is based. You have a little Shas Cotton over here. We're coming to discuss a little Baba Kama. You might be familiar with it. Itmar. The Torah says, and we saw it briefly, that let's see if we see it over here. The Torah says, okay, I didn't put it. Here it is. The Torah says like this: the Chigoif Ish Shar, right over here, where are my fingers? That the first time an ox gores the ox of a friend, vomes. So let's say one ox gored another ox. Then the Torah says if it's the first time the ox that gored, then the owner of the ox that did the goring should only pay half. Unless if we know if this ox gored a lot and the owner did not watch over that ox, then he pays the full price of the ox. But the first two times, he only pays half. Now the Gemara wants to know. We see how important it is to classify payments as a knas or as a mammon, because moed b'knas is pater. So the Gemara wants to know, when the Torah said that if your ox did Karen, gored another ox. Now, an ox goring another ox is a strange act. Everybody agrees it's a strange act, but yet the Torah says if it's the first time, we'll make you pay half. So what is that? Is that a knas or is that a mammon? Itmar, pal geniska. When the Torah says you pay half a nezik, Papa Ama pal geniska mamoina. Pal geniska is a mammon. It's a monetary payment. Rav Huda B'Rei Yeshua Ama pal geniska, half a nezik is knasa, is a fine. Why? What's the svara? Rav Papa says pal geniska mamoina, half a nezik is mammonis, because Kusavi he holds stam shvarim la becheska shimokan. Most oxes are not, you can't trust an ox. It can gore at any second. No matter how tame it looks, it's not guaranteed that it's not going to gore. It's in its nature. So therefore, really, when the ox gored, it's really the owner's fault. Ubedinhu, really, the Torah wanted the B'Shalom Kule, that he should pay the 100% of the damages. Rachmanahu the Chayes Levite, but the Torah had, God had Rachmanas on the owner. Because the ox did not become a muad yet, so let him get away with 50%. But really, it's his fault. It's the owner's fault. Rav Huda B'Rei Yeshua Amar pal geniska knasa. Half of the nezek is knas. Because he holds stam shvarim b'cheska shimur kaimim. Most oxes are presumed to be watched. In other words, they will not gore. They're tame. They're not a wild animal, and therefore, if this ox gored, it's really not the owner's fault. The owner should not pay anything at all, because it's really out of the out of the ordinary that this ox gored. But the Torah says we're going to find the owner because he has to watch out for this ox, because now he demonstrated that this is an ox that gores. So as a future warning, we find the owner. Not that he did anything at fault, but just to make him more aware in the future that he's going to have to watch this ox. So the Gemara is now going to go through a few rayas to come to the conclusion of is half a nezek knas or mammonis. And we're going to bring a proof in our Mishnah. First, the Gemara goes like this. Now we learned in the Mishnah, hanizik v'hamazik v'tashlumen. Both the victim and the perpetrator of the tashlumen. It doesn't matter. The nizik and the mazik both lose money in this transaction, v'tashlumen. By the first time that an ox gored his friend's ox, the victim also loses money, and the perpetrator, the mazik, also loses money. That's what the Mishnah says. So Bishlama, it makes perfect sense, this Mishnah. According to the opinion that says half a nezik is mammonis. So Hainin the shayach nizak b'tashlumen. That's why the nizik loses. Because why? He's originally supposed to get 100%. He lost out because now he's only going to get 50% of what he deserves. According to the opinion that says palge niska knasa, that half a nizik is knas. So why did the nizik lose out? Really, it's he shouldn't be getting anything. He's not supposed to get anything. But Tashlumen Isa, he's losing out something. I mean, how could he lose out? I mean, he's lucky that he's even getting half. He's not supposed to get half because according to the Mandiyama Palge Niske Knase, the owner is not at fault at all. Answers the Gemara, yes, the victim does lose out. At the depreciation of the carcass. What happens after the ox gored the other ox and killed it? Who has to take care of the carcass, get the tow truck to move it and bring it to the market to sell it as meat? So that is on the onus, is on the nizik. And if it depreciates in value from the time that the ox was killed to the time that you went to court, let's say you just left it there, the loss will be taken over by the nizik. So basically the nizik has a new responsibility. It's like lahavdil, if somebody's car got crashed, so now the owner of the car has to call the tow truck and waste a half a day until it gets to the shop. So same thing over here. Now this victim, the owner of the victim, the ox, has to take on the depreciation value of the carcass. So he is involved in the nevela. Because if he wouldn't be, then right then and there, you just say what's the value of the animal, and the owner and the mazik pays half. But now he's losing out something like this. Pchas nevela. So Gemara says, Pchas nevela tanina. Wait a second. Pchas nevela, the loss of the depreciation of the nevela, is another Mishnah. Because you're telling me hamnizik v'mazik b'tashlumin, I have another Mishnah that teaches you that concept. The depreciation of the carcass is undertaken by the nizik, because it says tashlumei nezek. The Torah, the Mishnah says that it doesn't say that the mazik pays nezek. He pays the balance of the nezek, of the damages. The tashlumei means the balance. Malamed, the Mishnah is teaching you shahabalim, the owner of the animal, metaplim b'levela. It has to be involved in removing the carcass. So we have two Mishnayos teaching you the same idea. So why do I need two Mishnayos teaching you the same idea? So the Gemara just answers that. Utzrich chad betam, one that was talking about if it was damaged by a tam, chad b'muad, and one is if it's talking about it was damaged by a muad. Again, tam is the first time animal, and a muad is if the animal gored 3 times. Utzricha, and I need both cases to teach me that the nizik is involved in removing the carcass. Diash meaning tam, if you just tell me by a tam, I'll tell you that it's really the onus is on the nizik, because it's not really the mazik's fault, because the animal didn't become a muad yet. So we put everything, we don't want to, put as it is, he shouldn't be paying at all. So he's paying half, so let's give something to the nizik to do. Avamuad, but if the animal gored 3 times, the iyayid, so really it's the mazik's fault. I might think that b'chas nevela, that once the mazik knows that he has a wild ox, so he's at fault if it does damage. So makes put it on the onus on him to take care of the carcass. V'yashmi in a muad. If we're telling you only by a muad that the muad owner has to take care of the animal, the reason why we say pchas nevela, we give him off a little bit on the lost depreciation of the carcass, is because he's paying anyway full price. So let's give him a discount. Let's not put too much on him. Avatam, but the tam, he's paying only half. So let's give him another responsibility to take on the depreciation of the ox. That's why we need in both cases that the onus of an ox that got killed is the one that has to remove the ox is the nizik, the victim. New Mishnah. Again, we're trying to prove is half a nizik knas or mamanis. Tashma ma bein tam lemud. What's the difference between a tam and a mud? Shatam mishalem chatzi negdim gufay umu mishalem nezek shalom min aliyah. A tam pays half the damages, and you only not more than the value of its self value. A mud, you'll have to pay the entire damage, and no matter what, you have to reach into your savings to pay the entire damage. Now, V'loi katani, but that's the Mishnah. V'loi katani, it doesn't say sha'atam eina mishalem apiyatzmei umud mishalem apiyatzmei. If palgei niska is knasa, then the Mishnah should say that a tam, if a guy walks into Bezdin and says, my shar killed somebody else's shar, he wouldn't pay on his own admission. And muad, you do pay on your own admission. The fact that the Mishnah doesn't use that as a difference must be that both tam and muad are mamanis, not knas. And says the Gemara, no, that's not a proof. The Tana V'Shire. Really, tam is a knas, but the Tana left out that exception. Didn't tell you that difference between a tam and a muad. So the Gemara says mashia dahaishay. It has to leave something else out, so it's not a complete list in order to leave this out. And says the Gemara, Shir Chatzi Koifer. There's another difference between a tam and muad not discussed in that Mishnah. And that is that if a tam killed a human being, another Yisrael, there's no such a thing you pay half the value of that person. There's no such a thing. So therefore, it already left 2 things out. That the tam doesn't pay Chatzi Koifer, and the tam doesn't pay Al Piyatzmoi. That's why it's not a question from that Mishnah. So Gemara says, no, imishim chatzi koifer lav shiur. Just because it doesn't mention chatzi koifer, that's not called leaving something out. We go to Mem Aleph and Bebeis. Hamani, maybe that Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yosef Aglili. That goes according to Rabbi Yosef Aglili. Tam shalom chatzi koifer. Tam does pay chatzi koifer. So that's not a good proof. Now we get into our Mishnah. Tashma, come in here. Hamish shori is pliny. A guy said, my ox killed so and so. Or shori shel pliny, or the ox of so and so. Now that's our Mishnah. You admitted and you have to pay. So the Gemara understood, my love, isn't our Mishnah talking about Batam? And a guy walked into Bezdin and said, my ox killed your ox, and it's the first time, you still have to pay Chatzi Nezek because of your admission. And says the Gemara, not a good proof. But Mu'id, our Mishnah is talking about Mu'id, that the ox scored 3 times. So what do you mean? Aval Batam, my Eina Mishalim al Piatzmi. If it was a tam, he wouldn't pay on his own admission. So tam, if it was a tam, then you wouldn't pay. So Ad Tani Sefer, why does the end of the Mishnah end off that if this animal killed an Eved, then you don't pay al Piatzmi? Avdei shel ploini Eina Mishalim al Piatzmi. Because killing a slave is knas, right? Because you pay 30 shekel. Niflik v'nisne b'didal. Let's make the differentiation not in who the animal killed, but in the animal itself. When do we say that you don't pay al pi atzmoi, that you pay al pi atzmoi is b'mu'id? By a mu'id, is mamanis, you pay in your own admission. Aval tam, but a tam, ain't a mishalim al pi atzmoi. A tam would not pay if he admits. So why did the Mishnah seek out, when they wanted to seek out to prove an ox could do something, could kill somebody, could kill something and not pay al pi atzmoi? It says it killed the slave. You don't have to change who it killed. You could just say if a tam that kills an animal, it depends. If it's a mu'ed, you pay al pi atzmoi, and if it's a tam, you don't pay al pi atzmoi because it's a knas. And says the Gemara, kula b'muda kamari. We want to talk about the Mishnah with not that the animal changes, but the victims change. It doesn't make a difference. So if the animal is a mu'ed, so it depends. If it killed another human being, it pays 100%, and if it killed an Eved, it would not pay it admitted. Okay, Tashma, come in here. Mishnah says if you pay more than what you did damage, you don't pay al piatzmai. That's called a knas. If you're paying more than you damage, if you damage, let's say 10 shekel, and you're forced to pay 30 shekel, that's called a knas. But let's say you pay less than what you damage. Mishalim al piatzmai. That's not called a knas. If it's tam, you're paying less than what you did damage, but that's still not called a knas. The Mishnah implies that you would pay al piatzmai according to your own admission. And to Gemara, don't say that if you damage less than what you damage, if you're paying less amount, that's called knas. No. Really, if you pay exactly what you did damage, then that's called mamanis. If you pay more than what you did damage or less than what you did damage, that's called knas. That's what the Mishnah said. Aval. So the Gemara asks the question, Pachos mai. If you paid, so what are you saying? That if you're paying less than what you did damage, you don't pay according to your own admission. In other words, it's a knas. So then the question is, listening, let us say, Zeh haklal. This is the rule. Kol she'ena mishalim kamal shehizik. If you're not paying exactly what you did the damage, if you're not paying full price of the damage, then you don't pay according to your own admission. And the mashma pachos or mashma yosa, that would imply whether you're paying less than your damages or more than your damage is knas. And you're telling me that less than damage is knas. So from our Mishnah, the fact that the wording of the Mishnah does not agree with the opinion that holds palgei niska knasa. So the Gemara says to Yofta, you're right. From our Mishnah, you refute the opinion that holds half a nezek is knas. So the Gemara says, V'hilka said, here's a strange thing. But the halacha is, palgi niska knasa. Half a nezek is knasa. So the Gemara says, Tiyufta, you just asked a refutation from our Mishnah. V'hilka said, you're going to paskin the halacha that half a nezek is knas? The Gemara says, and yes, because tamamai itoisiv. What was your question? How come the Mishnah did not say that if you're paying less than what you did damage, that's an automatic a knas? It's labeled as knas. Because it didn't say that if you're paying exactly what you did damage, it's called knas. Because loy psikale, it's not an absolute rule. Why? The Gemara is now going to tell you a halacha l'moshe Sinai. You see, I could hold that when an animal does damage with its horns, it's out of the ordinary, and really you shouldn't pay anything. But the Torah put a fine on you. Palgi niska is knasa. But sometimes half a nezek is going to be mamanis. Why? Because there's a halacha l'moshe Sinai that if the animal is walking normally, So that's a normal way it could possibly do damage. And it kicked up stones, and the stone shot out from its walking, and let's say broke a vase, right? That's called half a nezik from pebbles. The halacha Moshe Messina is, whatever the reason is, it's mominous. It's not a knas. Really, you're supposed to pay the full damage because that's normal events that happen with your ox that's walking normally. But we know the halacha Moshe Messina says you pay half. So that's why if our Mishnah would have said that anytime you're paying less than the damage, it's knas, that wouldn't hold true in all cases. That's why our Mishnah did not say it. Even the Ika, since it's possible, a case, chatzi nezek troiris, if you pay the half a nezek that comes out when you shoot up pebbles, the hilchas of gemirla, we have a lachal mashim sinai, it's not knas, it's paid, it's called mamanis. That's why the wording of our Mishnah only says it in this way, that if you're paying more than what you did damage, that in all scenarios is considered knas. But really, palginiska, by the tam case, where it's doing damage with its horns, it's a knas. Okay, now Gemara ends off with something fabulous. Now that you came up with this conclusion, palginiska knasa, that whenever an animal does damage with its horns or in any crazy way, it's automatically really not the owner's fault. And it's just a fine that the Torah put upon you. So therefore, the Gemara is written in Babylon, in Iraq. So what would be the story in this case? A guy owns a dog. Hi kalba, if you have a dog, right? The achol imre that choked a sheep and ate it. It took on a very large animal, which is strange. It did something out of character. V'shunra, or you have a cat. The ochel tarnagoli ravrave, it ate a big chicken. A small cat, a house cat, eating up a big chicken is an unusual thing. Mishurihi, since it's out of character, and it's therefore the only damages is knas. Well, knas damages were not allowed to be done paskin in Bavel. Why? Because the dayanim there did not have smicha, did not have the license. So therefore, v'loy magbinim b'Bavel, we won't in Bavel issue a court ruling against the owner of the dog or the cat because it's a knas payment. Avo zutre, but if it was a small chicken or a small sheep, urchi, that would be normal. Magbinim, and we would issue a court case because that's the normal way. But if it took on something so larger than its own body, then that's strange. And therefore, you don't go there in Bavel. V'itafas, if the victim grabbed something from the owner of the dog or the cat without going to court, then we don't remove it from him, because if he grabbed it, we let him keep it as long as it's up to half a nezek, half the damages. But if the victims, the owner of the chicken, of the owner of the sheep, says to the owner of the dog or the owner of the cat, Akbili zimni l'Eretz Yisrael, get your ticket, come to Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and there they are licensed dayanim. I have a case there. Makbinale. We forced the guy to make a ticket to go to Eretz Yisrael for this case. If he refuses to go, we put the guy in Cherem. Whether benkach or benkach mishamtinon. Then the Gemara ends off that whether he goes because the court called him in Israel, or whether he doesn't go, we always put him in Cherem. Why? We tell him, Salik hazechem, you got to remove the damage, remove this dog, you got to kill the dog, put it to sleep, or the cat, because this is an unusual killer cat or killer dog. And we have a lacha mid Rab Nosson. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Rab Nosson says, Minayim, how do I know? A person should not raise a wild dog or a bad dog in his house. If you might be an animal rights activist, but you're not allowed to have something that could potentially turn on you in any second. You shouldn't have a shaky ladder in your house that people use, and it could lead to somebody accidentally tipping over. Shinama, the pasuk says, don't put something in your house that could kill people. And therefore, no matter what, we always put this guy in cherem until he gets rid of this wild animal. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we're going to continue with the next parak. I remember. I remember that in Las Vegas there was a show with uh,